You were involved so much in this data scandal, and I just wonder, as you sit here and reflect, what has your experience been like?
Well, it's been intense. I'm not going to lie. Writing a book actually helped me really reflect on everything that happened. I talk about my journey from getting recruited at a military contractor to, working on modeling and data work that helps identify people who are more prone to paranoid ideation and extremism with the idea of trying to mitigate that problem, to having that work completely inverted after an alt-right billionaire and Steve Bannon acquired our company, to in effect do the same thing in America, targeting people who are more prone to radicalization, but in this case for the alt-right.
Christopher, coming forward the way you did, blowing the whistle on Facebook, which, as we said on this program many times, it's an incredibly powerful media company, maybe the most powerful media company in history. Yeah. What was that like? I mean, did you get any pushback from Facebook, any threats? And as you've sort of moved to publish the book and tell the story in full, have you heard from them at all?
Oh, girl, where do I begin? Before the story even emerged, I'd been working with law enforcement and regulatory agencies for months and months and months before the actual story broke. When Facebook found out that this story was emerging, something that they knew about Cambridge Analytica, well before any of this was published. The first thing that they do is threaten the journalists of The Guardian with, in my view, a spurious libel accusation. It turned out that everything was true. And in my case, they went and banned me. They banned me off of Facebook, and they also banned me for some reason off of Instagram. And then after that point, working, day in and day out with regulatory authorities in the EU, in the UK, in the United States, all over the world, one of the things that I really saw is just like the power that this company has to, to hide, to obfuscate their work, and things that, one of the things that I came to sort of understand is that, when you go and you blow the whistle, you see something that's wrong, and you report that to an authority. You think that there's going to be like some guy somewhere in some federal agency building that like knows what to do. And one of the things that I realized is that there isn't that guy. That guy doesn't exist. I've talked to governments, I've talked to regulators, I've talked to Congress, I've talked to parliaments. People do not know how to handle this problem. And for me, the real concern is that we have a completely unregulated digital landscape that companies like Facebook take advantage of. And even though companies like Cambridge Analytica now have dissolved and no longer exist, the capabilities are still there. And one of the reasons why I wrote the book was so that, to serve as a warning, because even if this company no longer exists, what happens if China becomes the next Cambridge Analytica? What happens if North Korea becomes the next Cambridge Analytica? And currently, there are no rules. We are entrusting our democratic process to a private company, and I question whether that's a good idea.
Well, Christopher, you mentioned that you're in conversations with lawmakers and other regulators, and I wonder if you think that the current regulation and current lawmakers are doing a good enough job handling the problem as you described.
Well, I think that one of the things going to Congress I realized was the power of lobbyists, particularly the power of lobbyists to define narratives. One of the first questions that I would always get at Congress is, can the law ever keep up with technology? And I would say, well, we regulate nuclear power plants, we regulate airplanes, we regulate medicine safety standards. There's all kinds of technologies that we regulate in the name of consumer safety. Just because something uses software or is on the internet doesn't mean that we can't create rules that require companies to consider whether the products that they're putting out into the public will be safe for people to use. The United States is one of the only OECD countries, I think the only OECD country, that doesn't have a national level privacy law. When you look at the language and the way that a lot of Silicon Valley companies talk about themselves, they say we're a service, there's opt-in, there's terms and conditions, all this stuff. Yet, when you look at the types of people who work at the company, right? They're called an engineer, they're called an architect, right? They build ecosystems and environments. These are things that people are going into. These are architectures. And when you look at how we regulate physical architecture or engineering, right? Where if you built a building, if you were an architect and you built a building without fire exits, and you said, well, it's okay because like people agreed, they opted into my building, they walked in and there was like a book of terms and conditions over there, and if it burns down, well, that was their choice. People wouldn't stand for that. And so I think that one of the things that I hope people, particularly lawmakers, if they read the book, one of the takeaways is we need to really understand what is social media. What are these platforms and their architectures, and they need safety standards.
So, we've got obviously 2020 elections coming up. The data that was at issue, with the Cambridge Analytica scandal that we've been talking about for years, is that data still around? And do we, is it possible or conceivable that it could actually come into play again, 4 years later? And I guess in a larger sense, how worried should we be about foreign interference, going forward?
I don't know. I don't know what happens with that information. I don't know what happened with that data. A lot of the same people who were working at Cambridge Analytica now work on the Trump campaign. This is a company that had regular contact with Russian officials. The CEO shared vodka with the Russian ambassador. You had its clients, regularly meeting with the Russian ambassador during 2016, and also then going and meeting with the Trump campaign. So the people exist, the capabilities exist. Whether or not the data still exists, I don't know. Facebook presumably has tried to contain the problem. When I dealt with them, they didn't really do much. But that's exactly why I think we do need to take a step back and go, should there be some kind of consumer safety watchdog when it comes to digital platforms? Because if no one's watching, these are the things that can happen. And in this case, we had people come forward and talk to the media, but what about the cases where that doesn't happen?
Christopher, I think we've talked a lot about the 2016 election, and I wonder, is it inevitable that this begins again with 2020? Yeah,
I think we are this is a new norm. One of the things that I talk about in the book is, how does information warfare work, particularly online? And this is, a new. We've created an open door to the minds of every single voter in the United States, and currently, we are trusting a company to protect people from hostile foreign interference. But we talk a lot about Russia, but my real concern is, what about all the other countries that have now watched what you're able to do, right? China, North Korea, Iran, you name it. These are all countries that have very strategic motives to interfere in the election, and currently, no one's protecting it, right? We are literally entrusting Mark Zuckerberg to do the right thing.
The candidate who's, I think, closest to where you're talking is Elizabeth Warren. She's talked a lot about regulating or even breaking up Facebook. Have you been in touch with anyone at the Warren campaign or any of the other presidential campaigns in terms of advising them on policy?
No, I haven't, but I'm definitely open to chatting with people. At any opportunity, I'll talk to people who are in, decision-making, positions. But I think that, it's great. What Elizabeth Warren is doing, I think, is great because, whether you love her or hate her, she is mainstreaming a conversation that really we all need to have. Whether you're a Democrat or Republican, we need to talk about, the impact of the internet on our political process. And this is something that everybody is a stakeholder in. And one of the points that she makes is we are literally relegating the role of referee to a private company. Just today they're saying, we're not going to take down, provably false information if it's political advertising. And it's why does a company get to decide that? It's something so vital and so important for how an election runs. So I'm heartened that she is talking about it. Other people are talking about it also. Andrew Yang, for example.
Right.
And I'm happy that that's part of a conversation.